big news from the Fed yesterday led to a large rally in the Bitcoin price. And in this video, I'm going to go ahead and talk about what the Fed mentioned, and I'm also going to cover how this affects Bitcoin and crypto. I also want to go ahead and talk about Bitcoin options as well and see how those have changed over the past couple of weeks, because I think that it's very telling on where people are expecting the price to go by the end of the month. But before we get to that, be sure to subscribe, be sure to hit that like button, and be sure to follow me on X. Bitcoin has had a very, very busy 24 hours. In fact, if we bring up the Bitcoin chart TA, we can see here that Bitcoin has been kind of moving all over the place. We've seen some pretty extreme volatility. And prior to Wednesday, we actually had a fairly large down day. Bitcoin on that Tuesday was down over 8.5%, almost 8.5%, followed by the next day, which was almost a 10% rally. Okay, so this right here, this huge rally, this was caused by Jerome Powell and the FOMC, which happened yesterday, and it was largely seen as a dovish type of event. I want to go ahead and talk about that right now. So the Fed basically held rates steady, and they maintained that they're going to be cutting 3 times sometime this year. Okay, so this is kind of more or less what people were expecting. This is what I was expecting coming into the FOMC, that they would continue to hint towards 3 rate cuts, and they would not make any changes for this current meeting. Now, for some odd reason, whenever this seems to happen, it always seems to push the markets higher, and it's not just Bitcoin, but it's also the traditional markets. Those tend to move up higher as I guess everybody gets bullish around the idea that Jerome Powell and the Fed are not going to be cutting basically until, who knows, maybe like 6 months or so. We'll have to see in the summertime. I think that that's probably very likely. We might see a rate cut, but this is more or less just establishing what they already said they were going to do. But that being said, Bitcoin rallied strong. It rallied hard. It went all the way down here to about 62,000, and the dip was bought, and the dip was bought heavily, and it pushed the price all the way up to about 68,000 or so. Now, that morning when I was talking about the FOMC coming, I didn't think that Bitcoin was going to rally that high. I thought we'd probably hit maybe 65K or so, but in fact, it went all the way up to 68K. Now, Bitcoin is kind of stuck in a range currently. We've been kind of stuck in this range ever since it entered the range at about the 1st or so of March. And for the last 3 weeks, Bitcoin has been kind of moving up, but moving down. It hasn't really broken out strongly yet above the highs that it made at 73K. But we do need to see Bitcoin make some consolidation before its next move higher. So this really isn't any concern as far as this looks. Now, I'm still expecting that Bitcoin will come back up here and retest that 73,000 level. And it looks like any sort of dip is going to be bought. So not only do we have a really nice dip right here, but we also had a really nice dip right here as well on about the 5th or so of March. And both of these dips were handily bought up, okay? We're starting to see some extreme buying momentum, and I expect that it's going to be tough to push Bitcoin under 60K, short of like a black swan event. Now, I also want to go ahead and talk about some of the year-end Bitcoin price predictions. We have here, CoinDesk reported that Bernstein was raising their Bitcoin target price to $90,000 at the end of the year. This is actually on the low side to one of the ones, some of the price targets that I've seen by the end of the year, and I've even said that we could go as high as maybe 200,000. So I think Bernstein is actually being fairly conservative with this, and I think that's actually not a bad thing, frankly. But that is one thing that we're looking at here with these banks raising the price target, as broker raising the price targets. Now, another thing that kind of played into this huge dip that we saw for Bitcoin was actual outflows from the Bitcoin spot ETFs. Now, if we go over here to Apollo and we check their Bitcoin flows indicator, we can see here that on the 18th, on the 19th, and on the 20th of March, they actually had negative flows for those days. So money was being taken out of of these Bitcoin spot ETFs, and as a result, they were forced to sell some of that Bitcoin. So we actually saw some significant losses here. But that being said, again, this is just kind of a dip. I think this is just more or less a bump in the road. And we've already seen some times in which we've seen outflows here, like back in the 24th, the 25th, 26th, around that area. We've seen some outflows from these spot ETFs and some profit taking. So this really isn't that concerning as far as the long-term picture goes. Bitcoin is still in a very healthy long-term upcycle. All right, now the next thing I want to talk about is what's been going on with the Bitcoin Exchange Reserve. So over the past month, we've talked about the Bitcoin Exchange Reserve and the number of Bitcoins on exchanges continuing to hit low after low after low, and that trend is still happening right now. In fact, I mean, you just see how far it's actually come down. We're sitting at about just a little over 2 million Bitcoin on exchanges, and I do expect that this is going to wind up moving under 2 million very soon. Coming into this monthly period, we actually had about 2 million and about 50,000 Bitcoin, and now we're down to just over 2 million. So we've seen some significant demand for Bitcoin coming off these exchanges. Now, if we also go ahead and take a look at our Bitcoin miners reserve and the number of coins in miners' wallets, we can see here that miners reserve is pointing towards miners continuing to sell. Now, again, I've talked about this a few times. I do think that it's going to continue to happen until we wind up hitting the halving. The halving is going to be coming here now, estimated April 18th. Okay, so they've actually moved the date up for the halving, but I think as we get closer and closer to the halving, it will have a more precise date. And so if you guys are keeping track, we are less than a month away from this halving. Now, another thing that I want you guys to pay attention to is the short versus long-term holder supply. This is really important because looking at the behavior of these long-term holders can give us an idea of how the long-term holder behavior and what their mindset is, okay? Traditionally, during bull markets, they tend to dump, and they tend to dump heavily. If you go ahead and take a look at about 2020, just before that bull market, they were sitting at 78% long-term holder supply. These are addresses that have held Bitcoin for at least 139 days. It went from 78% of supply all the way down to 67% of supply. All right. So what we're seeing here is a shift in the long-term holder behavior where they're deciding to, instead of holding that Bitcoin, they're deciding to sell it near the all-time highs. And so we've seen in the past significant movements from these long-term holders and selling their bag. So this was at 78, and again, it went all the way down to about 66%, so that's pretty significant. We haven't seen anything close to that just yet, but I will say that we're starting to see some of it. We had a peak here of about 85% or so back in December. Now it's actually all the way down to about 79, okay? So we've seen about 6% or so come off of the long-term holders. So keep that in mind. If we do continue to see this head lower, I do think that we'll be heading closer and closer and closer to a top, but we're not there just yet. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is the economic calendar. So we talked about the FOMC on Wednesday. That was a big event. Thursday, we had jobless claims. Friday, there's going to be another conference that happens here with Fed Chair Powell. He's going to speak in this event, and then you're also going to have the Fed Vice Chair as well that's going to be speaking. Other than that, it looks pretty simple for the rest of the week. Now, the next week, you have things like your Fed governor speaking, you have durable goods, you have S&P Case-Shiller Index, you have the GDP on Thursday, and consumer sentiment, and then Friday you have that PCE index, the preferred inflation index for the Fed on Friday. So, and he's also going to be speaking as well on Friday as well. So we're going to have some pretty significant volatility next week. This is what you guys need to be aware of. And finally, I want to cover the Bitcoin options. So I'm over here on Duribit. Now, when it comes to Duribit, it's important to look at the options expiry for the end of the month, which in this case is the 29th of March, you can see here that we have about $4.8 billion worth of call options and $3.7 billion worth of puts. Now, I'll say that this is a pretty significant number of puts. Normally, the call options are much higher, but puts are almost there. So you have people, an increasing number of people that are betting against the Bitcoin market right now. They have these put options, and they're expecting the price to go down by the 29th of March. Now, what we're expecting here on the 29th of March, if you're buying put options, most of them are actually buying it for the target price of about $50,000. I think that's highly unlikely at this point, but it's still a possibility. And if we take a look at our call options, the highest level of call options we have actually are at about 65,000, or basically right where we are right now. And I think that that's important because I think it's much more likely that we stay around that $65,000 region than it is that we go all the way down to 50,000. Okay. And the next level of calls that we've seen are down here at about 60,000. So there's a lot of support. We've seen it time and time again, a lot of support down here at 60,000 and 65,000. And I do believe that if we dip heavily, we're going to wind up seeing these buyers step in and they're going to buy the dip in anticipation of Bitcoin making a new all-time high. And I think that that's a very decent case to be made, especially as the daily RSI goes down to actually 52, which is fairly low for Bitcoin, especially in a bull market. But just goes to show you that right now, most of these options traders they're set for the status quo of the current $65,000 price region. All right. So let me know what you guys think. Definitely leave a comment below about the Fed. When you expect the Fed to cut, or what do you guys think about the outflows that we've seen for the Bitcoin spot ETFs? And I will catch you guys in the next video.